This story is told in the perspective of a female. This happened to me a few days ago on my way home after a long and busy day at work. I work right smack in the middle of downtown Salt Lake City, and I lived in the suburbs, so it was a long drive back home. My boss, being the asshole he was, gave me a week of closing shifts during the week I was supposed to be out of town for vacation. However, he said that the company needed extra help and told me I couldn't go. Needless to say, I was pissed, but hey, you can't always win, right? It was around 7, maybe 8 o'clock at night, and I had about an hour to get home. I ended up taking a different route home, as this route would only take me about 45 minutes than the hour drive. Seeing the fact that I was dead tired and just wanting to go home, I decided to take the route. According to my GPS, I was about halfway home, listening to my music, when I hear my car start making this rattling noise. I cussed myself as this noise continues, causing my car to come to a complete stop. Thankfully though, the road was empty, as no one ever used it at this time of night, but that obviously didn't solve the car problem. For context, I drive a 2003 Honda Civic, aka box, which always had problems with it. I'm only 19 and my job doesn't pay enough for me to afford a new car. I work 20 hours a week, making $15 an hour, so it was the only thing I could afford. I pop the hood and take a look at the car to see that my car battery was full of corrosion. Out of anger, I hit my car knowing that I'd have to call a tow truck, which could be a mission seeing how far I was from the city. That being said, I called AAA, but they said it could take a while to send someone out due to the distance. Alright, whatever. I guess I didn't have a choice, right? Needless to say, I bite my lip, just waiting inside my car for the tow truck to come. After a while, I started to notice how alone I was on this road. It was dead silent, and all I could hear were the crickets from the woods. As I'm playing a game on my phone, I look in my rearview mirror and see a pair of headlights approaching me from the back. The closer it came, the more I made it out to be a truck. I thought that it could have been the tow truck, but as it pulled up behind my car, I saw that it was definitely not a tow truck. It was just a standard white pickup truck, and that's when I saw a man that appeared to be Hispanic step out and tap on my window. I'd say he was maybe in his mid-50s, asking me if I needed a lift. Trying to be safe, I lower my window just a tad and tell him that my car broke down, but that the tow truck was on its way. I thank him for the offer, but told him I had everything under control and that I didn't want to be a bother. For some reason though, this guy didn't seem to get the hint and began to ask me if I could open the door for him and that he could help me. This started to concern me now. He wasn't going away and was now trying to get in my car. Keep in mind, there's nobody else on this road, and I'm basically in the middle of nowhere with this person who seemed as if they were up to no good. He stares at me through the window for a good minute or so before walking back to his truck. I thought that was the end of it and that he would finally drive off, but boy was I wrong. After spending about 5 minutes in his truck, he comes back out and motions for me to roll down my window. I comply and roll down my window a bit and ask him what he wanted. This time in a more annoyed tone, as I didn't want anything to do with him. Somehow he notices my change of behavior and says that he's just trying to help and that there's no reason to get angry with him. I tell him that I didn't need help and that the tow truck would take care of me. He then goes on to explain that he had a pair of jumper cables in his truck and could easily get my car started. At this point, I see yet another pair of headlights coming from behind me and instantly recognized it as the tow truck. Yeah, look man, help is already here. Thank you for the offer, but I'd rather have the tow truck help me. By this point, the tow truck driver gets out and the man then looks both ways, turns to me, and walks back to his truck driving away. The tow truck driver then comes to my window and I open my door explaining the issue with my car's battery. As I'm telling him what's going on, he stops me mid-sentence and asks if I knew who that man was. I told him no and that he just pulled up behind me and tried to help. The tow truck driver just stared at me with this pale face and said that he's actually seen that man before. Turns out, he was a registered sex offender from 2 towns over and would sometimes be on this road at night looking to lure any unsuspecting women. This ranged anywhere from getting him to go with him somewhere to attempting to get in their cars, which is exactly what he tried doing. He was released from prison 3 years ago for good behavior and hasn't been seen since. The tow truck driver was almost certain it was him, as he was able to get a good look at him from the headlights of the tow truck. He tows my car away with him giving me a ride to the police station, making sure I was safe. I couldn't give an accurate description to the police other than that his truck was white. The police said they do some investigative work, but never got back to me about any leads. It's been almost a week now, and I'm still paranoid knowing that he's probably still out there. Had I been that dumb or naive to open my door or window for him, God, I don't even know what he might have done. One thing I will take from this is that I'll never drive down that road at night again, and I always carry pepper spray with me. This story is a bit short, but this is seriously one of the creepiest moments of my life. I'm a 26-year-old female and I was driving home from a friend's birthday party one night. I live in a very rural area of Tennessee, so there's a lot of hills, forests, and flatlands throughout most of the state. Anyway, on this particular night, I was driving through I-81 between Knoxville and Bristol. It was around 2 a.m. on a weeknight, so there were no other cars on this road other than mine. Now, whenever I'm out late at night, I always remember to have my nighttime coffee. This night, however, I didn't have my coffee, which caused me to become exhausted while behind the wheel. So there I am, driving for about 25 minutes when, out of nowhere, something jumps out onto the road from the trees. This scared me to the bone, causing me to let out an oh shit and brake hard. It looked like a person, to be honest, who just straight up jumped in front of my car as if they were trying to get hit. I only caught a glimpse of them and tried to see if I had ran someone over. I was ready to give this person a piece of my mind and got out of my car to see not a soul in sight. I was seemingly the only person on this road, and right then I started freaking out, wondering what the hell just happened. After taking a few minutes to compose myself, I get back in my car only for it to not start. I tried starting the engine several times, but nothing I did ever made it work. Long story short, I called a tow truck to give me a ride, and it took about a month to get my car back up and running. Till this day, I'm strongly convinced that whatever I had seen was completely paranormal and was the reason for my car dying. So, I'm a 25-year-old male, and this happened just last year in the summer. I was on a road trip from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Los Angeles, California. The reason for this trip was to visit my old friend from my childhood who I hadn't seen in years. Moving away from one of your best friends is enough to make anyone feel lonely and sad. His name was Jason, and we had been good friends ever since I could remember. I had only saw him once a year when I had time off from work, so this trip was very important to me. If I remember correctly, I was driving down a long stretch of road somewhere in Arizona when my car suddenly dies out of nowhere. Being rightfully pissed off, I hit my dashboard while trying to get the damn thing to start. Eventually, I get out of my car and open the hood. My car's battery had been covered in battery acid and had spread throughout the other components. I was stuck on an empty road in the middle of nowhere with nothing but desert and cliffs. I took out my phone to try and get a hold of Jason to see if he could come get me. When we were younger teens, we'd always have this little slogan when trying to reach each other. It went something along the lines of, "So-and-so, do you copy?" And I repeat the catchphrase, attempting to reach him. "Hey Jason, do you copy? I'm in a bit of a pickle here." However, signal around here was basically non-existent, so I had no other choice but to walk to the nearest town. All the while, I'm still trying to reach Jason, but there was no luck. About 15 minutes into my walk, I look behind me and notice two headlights in the distance getting closer and closer. It only took me a second to realize that it was a car, and I flagged them down while practically begging for help. Believe it or not, it seemed as if my prayers had come true, as the car then starts to slow down and pulls up next to me. Inside was an older-looking gentleman, and in the back were two younger men with a middle-aged woman wearing sunglasses in the middle. The two men seemed to be carrying her as she appeared to be asleep. The driver asked as to how they could be a help, and I explained my situation to them. One of the men in the back seat had said something about how that sounded like a you problem and that they'd be no help. I apologized, thanking them for their time, and told them I'd be on my way. However, that's when I noticed the woman in the car. She looked slumped over and just appeared to be out of it. I then asked in a direct tone to the driver, "Everything alright with her?" He then looks at the men, looks at me, and says, No, she's dead, but why is that your concern?" One of the men in the back take off her sunglasses, revealing her face. The second I saw her face, I can now see as to why she was deceased. Her lifeless body limped over the two men with her mouth hung open as if it had been broken. The driver then looks at me and says 6 words that have haunted me ever since. Calling the cops would be a mistake. I then back off and start running back to my car as the other car sped off until they were too far to be seen. Thankfully, my car willingly started back up again, where I was able to go to the next town and get a new battery. I obviously did inform the police about my encounter and gave them an exact description of the men. Up until now, however, there have been unfortunately no leads as to who might have been responsible. In the end, I did get to see my friend, and nothing happened again while on that trip. There are truly some sick and twisted people in this world that we just have to live with. It's unfortunately a harsh reality of life.
Hey everyone, my name is Dennis Blaze. I was around 17 when this happened. And to give you an idea of how long ago this took place, I am now 43 years old. I grew up in a small town across from Seattle during the late 90s. At the time, there was maybe a total population of 6,000 to 7,000 people. The town didn't really have a whole lot of things to do. One night I was hanging out with my 3 friends, who we'll call Gary, Mark, and Rob. We all got bored of just sitting at home, so we decided to go for a drive. We stopped to eat at a McDonald's before continuing our aimless endeavor. We had been driving for about 15 minutes after we left the restaurant. It must have been about 10 p.m. at this point. My vehicle was a '92 Ford Probe. Mark rolled down his window. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just figured he needed some air. We were descending a large hill when I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. The lights got closer, and I saw that it was a semi-truck, but it wasn't hauling a trailer behind it. As the semi-truck was approaching, I could see Mark sitting forward. I wasn't sure what he was doing. I then saw him throw something at the truck as it passed. "What the hell are you doing?" "Relax, it was just a sweet and sour packet from the Nuggets." I was annoyed, but I didn't think anything would happen. We got to the bottom of the hill, When I looked into the rearview mirror, I could now see the headlights from the semi-truck barreling down the hill, rushing directly at my car. Holy shit. Everyone in the car turned around at once. I think he just pissed him off, Mark. I quickly found a driveway to turn around, then raced back up the hill as fast as I could to gain some distance from the semi-truck. When I got to the top of the hill, I turned off all my lights, and everyone in the car told me to turn down this side road that was pitch dark. I could barely see a thing, but I decided to go for it. I then turned the car back around before putting it in park. We thought it would be a good idea to wait for a few minutes before heading back to my house. We waited for about 2 minutes when we saw those damn headlights coming in our direction. I couldn't believe it. The truck driver must have seen us turn down this road. I thought for sure we had lost him. The massive truck seemingly blocked our only way out. It came to a full stop. We then heard the driver's side door opening. Soon the driver was illuminated by his own headlights. This man looked huge. What the hell should we do, Mark? You're the one who got us into this. What do you think we should do? Let's get the out of here. I don't think I have enough room to get around him. No, that's not true. On the left, there's a clearing. He's not hauling a trailer, so if you floor it now, you should have just enough room to get around him. I decided to trust Mark and stepped on the gas pedal. I narrowly missed hitting the man. I remember him angrily shouting at us as we zoomed past. Who knows what he would have done if he got his hands on any one of us. Mark turned out to be correct. I had just enough room to make it out of there, and I floored it all the way back home. My parents were at the casino that night, and they weren't going to be home for at least a few more hours. We locked all the doors and closed the curtains, checking every couple of minutes for any headlights. When we were convinced that we were no longer in danger, we all had a good laugh about the whole situation. It was crazy. I told Mark he's no longer allowed to eat chicken nuggets again. I'm glad we all made it out of there safely. But I'll never forget the fear I felt when I was staring down those headlights on that dark road.
About 5 years ago, I was driving back home from work late one night. I worked at a restaurant/bar at the time and often worked very late. So it was past midnight when I was finally going home and driving my Honda Accord. I lived with my parents during this time in a neighborhood about 10 minutes from my job. So after leaving work, I got onto the roads, which were very quiet, as they often were in the late night hours. It was a huge difference from when I would go to work and there would be lots of cars on the road, to when I would drive home and there would be basically nobody. So within probably 2 or 3 minutes of driving home, I did notice a car behind me. When it started following me though, I had no idea. I kept driving home and was realizing that the car behind me was turning wherever I did. Soon, I was very suspicious that I was being followed. I was never quite 100% sure though. I thought maybe it was a neighbor or something. There are many other houses in the neighborhood. Still, I was suspicious by it. Soon, I had made it to the street where my parents' house was. I turned onto it, and the car behind me did the same. I actually thought about driving around the block or turning around, but ultimately, I drove to my house and pulled into the driveway. I remember being really nervous as I was pulling in that the car would as well, but it didn't. Instead, the car kept going down the street. I felt much better and then got out of my car and walked inside. By now, my parents and sister had long gone to bed upstairs. The lights were off inside the house and it was very quiet. I went into the kitchen to make some ramen noodles or something like that. I was very hungry and wanted something quick to have before bed. As I was waiting for the water to heat up though, I casually walked around a little. I went into the living room and glanced out the front window. That's when I noticed a car driving extremely slow down the street. And I further noticed that it was the same car that had seemingly followed me all the way home. Now I was very suspicious. I continued to watch out the window. The car then turned and parked on the side of the street just past our house. I heard the engine turn off and then watched the driver's door open and saw a man get out. He then started walking towards our front yard. That's when I jumped back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. I went back into the kitchen and just hoped that this guy wasn't going to try to break in or something. Seconds later though, there was a knock at the front door. My heart started racing. What could this guy possibly want? Several moments went by and he knocked again. I slowly walked into the living room and went to a window. When I looked outside, I saw the man walking away from the front door, but he wasn't going back to his car. Instead, he walked around the side of our house. I went back into the kitchen and looked out of a back window. I was very careful when I was looking so that I wouldn't be seen. The man appeared to walk through the backyard. He made his way through the backyard and then went out of sight again. I then went back to the front of the house. When I looked out of the window, I didn't see the guy for a while. Soon though, I saw him going through the front yard. He went back to his car, then got inside. Then he drove away. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I looked out of the window a few more times that night, but he didn't come back. I still wonder who he was, why he followed me home, and what he was doing.
Back when I was 18 years old, for about 6 months, my boss drove me to work. I know that may sound a little weird, but I didn't get a license yet, and he knew my mom. It also helped that he lived about 2 minutes from my house. It was just a weird situation, and no matter how I try to preface it, I just know that it sounds weird. Most mornings, the drive to work was uneventful. We'd usually get to work at around 6:30 a.m., and neither one of us would talk in the car. He was usually hungover, and I just wasn't the talkative type. I'm a quiet person by nature, but I was even quieter back then. One day, we had to go to work at 3 in the morning for inventory. My boss decided it would be good to show me, so I got up extra early for that 3 a.m. shift. On the way into work that morning, my boss said that he wanted to grab some coffee at the gas station since it was the only place that was open. When we parked, as he was getting out of the car, he told me that he was going to hit the restroom as well. I just nodded and decided to wait in the car. I was exhausted from staying up way too late playing video games, and I was planning on just resting my eyes until we got to work. I'm assuming a few minutes had passed. I don't know exactly how long it was because I was falling asleep while I was waiting for my boss. With no notice, the back seat door opened, and it startled me in my half-asleep state. I just thought it was my boss, and then I felt movement behind me. I finally looked behind me, and just sitting there in the back seat was a woman. She didn't appear to be homeless or look like she was on anything. She just looked strange. And we made eye contact for a few seconds, and then I whipped back around trying to process what was happening. I'm a really quiet person, and I was even more quiet back then, like I said, and I didn't know what to say or what to do. I was just hoping my boss was going to come back out soon. I started to finally work up the courage to ask what was going on, and I was immediately freaked out when I turned around. She was sitting there, now smiling, but looking forward. I don't really know how to describe her eyes. They were cold and dark and seemed almost lifeless, even though she was kind of pretty. Even as I write this, I still can't get the image of her out of my mind. It had probably been about 30 seconds since all this started, and I finally uttered my words when I asked her, "Hey, is everything okay? You know this isn't your car, right?" Instead of answering with words, she just started to scream, erratically. It was so erratic that it was shaking the entire car, it felt like, or maybe just my head. I jumped back just out of panic, confusion, and shock, and I saw my boss walking out of the gas station. I just dove out of the passenger side door and shut it behind me. My boss was confused and asked me what the heck was going on, and I just pointed to the woman in the back seat of his car. We both just stood there, almost in amazement and disbelief. She was still screaming, shaking and rocking back and forth. We could physically see the car shaking from her wild movements from inside the car. My boss approached the back seat where she was sitting, and as he grabbed the door handle, she put both her hands on the window, and I kid you not, started to hiss and growl at my boss. He said, "Nope," and walked back towards me. I was standing probably 10 feet away at this point. He immediately called the police, and we were hoping that they would arrive soon since it was a small town. The entire time that we were waiting for the cops, we could hear the woman screaming and the car still shaking. After a minute or two of waiting for the police, we went inside and watched her from inside the gas station. There was just something unsettling about the entire situation. She wasn't trying to rob us. She only looked like she wanted to cause harm when we got near the car. I mean, she was sitting in the back seat, so she wasn't even trying to steal the car. It was just all so weird. The cops showed up maybe 5 minutes after the call. We went outside to greet the officer and fill him in on the situation, and he looked confused, and I'm not going to lie, he almost looked kind of amused by the whole situation. The officer tried to get the woman to come out calmly, but after a minute of her screaming and growling, he basically went into the car and apprehended her. And this is where this bad dream truly turned into a nightmare. Upon arrest, the officer had to remove 4 knives from her person. Yeah, you heard that right. This woman had 4 sharp objects on her. Thankfully, she never showed us the knives or even hinted at the fact that she had them. But even more disturbing perhaps is the fact that she didn't have an ID on her and she wasn't talking, so the officer had no idea who she was. This complete stranger came out of nowhere. She got into my boss's car without saying a word. She went from smiling to off-the-wall insane. Then, to cap things off, she had no ID and 4 deadly weapons on her. I've had some wild things happen to me over the years, but I'd have to say that this was probably the strangest and most terrifying that's ever happened to me. It's been years, and I remember this moment like it was yesterday. I'll never forget that woman's face, and I honestly wonder what she's up to now.